Hey friends, happy Monday morning. It is psychic medium Josh Simons coming to you with your weekly message. I've done this for a few weeks now, and first week I think I pulled some tarot cards or runes. The next week I pulled some tarot cards or runes. This week I'm not pulling any of that stuff. I've had a message sitting inside of me for this past week that I just need to get out to the world. And this is what I'm doing here today. Something that has come up over and over again in the past week or so with all of the readings that I've done has to do with, how do I say it, outside influences. And I'll try to explain to you the way that this is kind of sat with me. I gave a reading to a woman probably a week or so ago, and hardworking mom, wife, taking care of business, doing what she can in this world, and yet she was suffering. She was suffering because she was missing a member of her family, and she had to do something, without getting into too many specifics, she had to do something that created a barrier between her and that family member, because that family member wasn't healthy for her, or healthy really for any of the other family members. And everything that was coming through from spirit, everything that was coming through from her ancestors and her helping spirits was like screaming at me, "You're not a failure. You're not a failure." And over again, it's made very clear to me that there are two types of things in this world, or two types of occurrences, if you will. There are the occurrences that we make happen, right? And then there's the occurrences that happen to us. And there's a big difference here, right? There's a big difference here. When you are living life, and you're living life with a bunch of other living creatures, living people, if you will, people that have their own spirits, their own consciousness, their own drive and will to make it through this world, things are going to happen that are outside of your control. So take this mom who did everything right in her world, worked hard, was loyal and steadfast to her family, did everything she could, and yet things were happening around her that were outside of her control. Inside of herself, she saw those things that were happening as a result of what she did or didn't do. And it was very clear that my message to her in that moment was, you are not your roulette wheel. And what I'm talking about here is the idea that things happen for a reason, and then sometimes things don't happen for any reason whatsoever. I really don't care for that expression, everything happens for a reason. I don't believe everything happens for a reason. I just gave a benefit reading for a local family who found out their 14-year-old daughter had terminal cancer and she was going to be gone within the next couple of weeks. There's no spiritual thinking out there. There's nobody out there that would ever convince me that that happened for a reason. Now, you're going to see a lot of people in the spiritual community saying things of the nature of like, well, that was the contract that we signed walking into this world. And I don't buy that. Again, I'm a spiritual person, but I don't buy into the fact that everything is dictated with a reason, right? When reality, the universe kind of spun into creation, the Big Bang, what have you, I believe in reality, our existence is dictated by the fact that some random thing comes out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. that you weren't expecting, you had no control over, you didn't cause to happen, and yet there's no reason behind it. So when I say things don't necessarily always happen for a reason, I do believe that things do sometimes happen for a reason, but I don't believe that everything happens for a reason, right? This local family who's dealing with a 14-year-old daughter leaving the world far too soon, there's really no reason other than I believe her biological chemistry came across something that her cells didn't like and started to produce cancer. Other than that, there's no blame, right? There's no great fate or destiny or gods or spirits in dictating that to happen. I don't believe. I mean, I could be wrong. I do believe in this world there are certain things we can't control, and there are certain things that happen without any reason. So when I say you're not your roulette wheel, if you're familiar with roulette, and I use this example because this was given to me during a reading, right? Somebody's ancestors were speaking in gambling speak. I'm not a gambler, but a roulette wheel is those red and black spaces, right? And with numbers on them, and you bet either on red or black. I've never bet at a roulette wheel. I don't know how they work, but I do know that you drop the ball into it, and it lands on a spot. Sometimes you win, and sometimes you don't. And sometimes that ball lands where it lands for absolutely no reason other than the influences around it, right? Most of us watching this have probably taken algebra and understand the idea of an algebraic equation. When you have an algebra equation and you plop in different variables, it affects the outcome, right? So this woman who had to draw a line between her and a family member, and it really hurt her. When she sees that as a reflection of herself, she did something wrong. She must have done something wrong. The world or the gods or the spirits wouldn't have done this to her. I had to, and I don't even know if she knew what she was feeling on the inside of herself there. Sometimes our spirits know what we're feeling more than we do. It was really a powerful message for her to hear and for me to deliver, that she's not the sum of her parts. She's not the algebraic equation that happens around her. Most people watching this are going to be people that are hard workers, hard lovers, doing what they can for those who are dependent on them, who they love. And yet, sometimes the tire blows going down the highway, right? And there's no other reason other than there was a nail or something happened to that tire. We can do everything we can to be steadfast, to be strong, and yet, like that expression in the 80s said, shit's gonna happen, right? Shit happens. that is a message that we all need to hear. And when that shit does happen, it's not a reflection of our worth, of our value. I can feel people watching this video right now, hearing these words, needing to be told this, needing to understand this, that yeah, you're working hard, you're doing, what you can. You're not your algebraic equation. You can be a wonderful wife or husband for 15, 20 years, however long, and then all of a sudden your partner decides they don't want to be with you anymore. Your partner decides that they want to run around and cheat on you, right? And when that stuff happens, when we get those unknown influences that come out of nowhere, we automatically go, was it me? What did I do? What did I do wrong? Is it me? I don't know, right? Our tendency is to blame ourselves, right? Because we can control a certain amount in our life and we can control ourselves. And yet somehow we always become the blame to ourselves that, well, if I'd have done this more, if I'd have done that more, if I'd have done this. Perhaps what happened to you was meant to happen for the greater good of all involved. Perhaps what happened to you just happened because shit happens. You're not your algebraic equation. You're not your roulette wheel. And I'm very strong about this. I feel very strongly about this because I see so many people clinging to reason, needing to have a reason why things happen. And sometimes there is no reason. Something that I come across often is people suffering from the ravages of drug addiction, right? Alcoholism, sex addiction, gambling addiction, whatever it is. They have somebody that they care for in their life, and this person has fallen victim to that out of control pleasure center, if you will. And that's kind of what addiction is, right? There's a part of the brain that's been stimulated and given pleasure, and the person who's addicted goes back to it and goes back to it and goes back to it. And sometimes they go back to it so often and so hard that nothing else matters. The example that I use with folks who suffer from addiction or people in their lives with addiction is this. A lot of folks watching this will have a love of the ocean, and a lot of folks watching this will understand the idea of low tide, high tide. If you are somebody who's ever had somebody in your life who's fallen out of control, if you will, or fallen victim to some sort of addiction or a problem like that, and then blames themselves that they couldn't make it better, right? Well, if I'd have tried harder, if I'd have done this, if I'd maybe worn these clothing, my husband wouldn't have gone off and done what he did, right? We have this tendency to blame ourselves. If you've ever had this, if you've ever been a victim of circumstance like this, I want you to imagine that you and I are standing at the ocean and it's low tide, right? The water's out and we're about to have high tide come in. I want you to imagine that you're standing over by the shore and I say, hey, high tide's about to happen. Do me a favor and stop it. Now, if we were standing on the ocean and high tide was about to happen, and I said, hey, go ahead and stop that, you'd look at me like I was an idiot. High tide, low tide. The tides are a force of nature. And when you have somebody in your life that you have to separate yourself from because they're suffering or they're causing other people to suffer, if you have somebody that has addiction problems or alcoholism or any of those problems, and you're mad that you couldn't have done anything to stop it, you couldn't have done anything to change it, being mad at something like that is being as mad as not being able to stop high tide or low tide. Because the people in your life, some more than others, are a force of nature. They're a force of nature, and they will do unto themselves and others as they will. And sometimes we have to learn those experiences. And when people do those things, right, when people suffer willingly, or when people cause other people to suffer, or people decide to take that pill or drink that booze or whatever they're doing, that all of a sudden becomes another variable in your equation, right? That you had nothing to do with, you can't control it, and yet it's out of your control. When that stuff happens, the last thing that you should do is blame yourself, beat yourself up. Look at the scenario with clarity and honesty, and then ask yourself if there's anything that you can do to make it better. And if there is something that you can do to make it better, try to do that thing. But if you can't make it better, dismiss yourself from it. Relieve yourself from that burden of guilt and worry. It doesn't serve you, it doesn't serve them, it doesn't serve anybody. If you're pouting because the high tide came in, I mean, it's a little ridiculous, right? And I say that with all the love in the world. But it comes to a point where we have to be honest with ourselves, honest with our circumstances, and honest with the influences that are happening in our life, right? COVID, coming out of 2020, this is a really good example. Not anybody could have changed COVID. I mean, generally speaking, we as individuals couldn't have stopped this virus from coming from wherever it came from, and we couldn't have stopped it from affecting and devastating the communities that it has. But we can make those little changes in our life to make sure it stays at bay as best we can. When there are things in your life you can't control, don't beat yourself up for being unable to control them. One of the ways that you'll figure out if this is appropriate or not is to ask yourself if what you're putting yourself through is fair to anybody else that would be in your position. So if you had a daughter, a sister, a best friend, a mother, or somebody that's dealing with those variables, and they were beating themselves up in the same exact shoes, in the same exact space, you'd be like, that's kind of ridiculous. Don't beat yourself up over that. You don't have anything to do with it. You must extend that same sort of compassion to yourself. And that's what this is compassion. So please, as best you can, understand what you have control over and what you can make happen in your life. And then come to terms with that which you can't control. And when you come to terms with those things, and if those things have a negative impact on your life in any way, don't beat yourself up. You didn't deserve it. You're not paying for a past life. Fupa, you're not, I mean, this is just, sometimes shit happens. And when it does, we do what we can to pick ourselves up and to take care of those around us. But the last thing we need to do is blame ourselves. That's not healthy for anybody. I don't know who needs to hear this message, but somebody does. And I'm relieved to provide it, because now the itch inside of me to get this out to folks is gone, right? I've had this urge to get this out all week long. Like, oh, can't wait till my Monday morning message. And now that I've done that, that tension is off of my shoulders. And that's kind of how Spirit works with me. Mind the variables, mind the roulette wheel of life. You are not the roulette wheel that happens to you. You're not the algebra equation that happens around you. Over the course of this week, mind that, please, and do whatever you can to be as kind to yourself as you would have a sister or a daughter, a best friend, a mother, somebody that you love. Be as kind to yourself as you would have them be as kind to themselves. That type of compassion and self-love is what we all deserve. So take care of yourself. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next Monday.